Life insurance has long been an expected piece of a well-rounded financial plan. At least, that was the case for previous generations. Now, life insurance is often described by consumers as impersonal, expensive, and outdated. In Canada, a startup called Dundas Life is imagining a world where life insurance could be more than a cold exchange between strangers.
We're not recreating the wheel in many respects. We're just making the existing process faster, but we're also taking the time to ensure that we understand what the client problem is as well. It's not just quick and transactional, it really is consultative in nature, or at least that's our opinion. I'm Gregory Rozdeba. I'm the CEO at Dundas Life.
In an industry that's failing to grab younger people's attention, Dundas Life is putting personalization and modern values at the forefront of its mission. Gregory shows us that pivoting, even if it means changing up your driving product, isn't the end of the line. In fact, it may just be worth millions. So, first question, what is Dundas Life?
I stumbled into it to a certain degree, but when we kicked this off, we realized that in the life insurance space in Canada, there wasn't an easy way to find the right product, as ridiculous as that might sound. We wanted to create a place where people can just come get reasonable advice and get the product that fits their situation. In terms of the more mundane aspects of things in the life insurance industry, there's still a lot of paperwork, a lot of paperwork, especially in Canada. And we wanted to simplify it because ultimately you turn it into a software or you use some tools that make the whole process either automated, digital, or at least templated. It makes the process easier for the clientele. And that's effectively how we came about starting Dundas Life here. There's just so many problems from a process standpoint that needed to be addressed that just flat out weren't. And simultaneously, if you're on the software side, there are many aspects of the life insurance industry you don't really get access to. Because you don't manage the relationship, you don't own the transaction. So we kind of had to play in both. So while brokering the actual business and helping people with their life insurance needs, simultaneously in the back end, we've basically been building out the software that our business requires. It's like that meme where you have the train going and the guy's just trying to build a track right in front of it. It's similar in that sense, except there is a bit of a track. It's predominantly paper, but it works today the conventional way because there's a real need for the product. Our reasoning behind, I guess, the firm was if we build out the digital back office to a certain degree, then not only can we facilitate the transaction, person to person, but we can also take the conventional paperwork and just send it through much faster. Just remove a lot of the processing time, remove a lot of the unnecessary administration, and we've been fueling that with our life insurance sales. So we've been kind of forced to do both.
What was the driving force behind the creation of Dundas Life?
If you chat with anyone in the fintech space, or at least a few years ago, this was super popular. People talking about disintermediating brokers or, going directly to the insurer, going directly to the mortgage provider, going directly to the bank, whatever. And I think it made a lot of these product offerings very impersonal. I mean, ultimately, if you're talking about someone's mortality, you'd want to talk to someone about it. And you get a lot of people with chronic conditions, illnesses. They don't want to just be dealing with some sort of very slick intake flow. I mean, these things are deeply personal. You're filling out a form, you're kind of sitting there, at least this is the feedback that we've received. You're sitting there as a prospective client, you're filling the stuff out, and it's just like, I get it, you have to fill out some forms, but when you're asking for information that's just so personal, I mean, life and death to a certain degree, health related and financial, because we really do see it all here from a life insurance standpoint. The experience really mattered. And it wasn't just the matter of putting someone on the phone, but I think empathy was very important in this process as well. Because again, it's life and death. When the person passes away, their loved ones will be reaching out to us to help them resolve this issue. And the last thing you want to be doing is sitting on a 1-800 number for an insurer when you're grieving, a close loved one. Give it to someone else that could do it for you. And that's our job. That's our responsibility to our clientele to really make that side of things easier.
How did you develop an MVP for Dundas Life?
Oftentimes, especially early days, like convincing investors, like they're big picture people typically. I mean, that's a completely different ballgame than going to an individual consumer and saying, hey, does this fix your problem? Or going to a company and saying, hey, does this make sense? And if it doesn't, why? But you need a proof of concept. You need to prove that someone will buy it. In our situation, one of the interesting takeaways was we wanted to let the consumer pick a product for themselves. And then we realized there were so many shortcomings to that kind of approach. People would buy a lot less than they would actually need. And a 30-second conversation would flip that around and they'd say, no, I guess you're right. Maybe I should add more just in case, or pick the wrong product altogether. No fault of their own. I mean, people buy insurance once every decade or a couple of decades. It's not something that they're living in. I don't blame them. But we hit a point where we thought direct-to-consumer products should be more of a facilitator rather than a driver. And that was one of the big takeaways. We didn't know that out the gate, but we learned that very quickly because, again, we put it out there, we did some testing, got the feedback, and realized, yeah, we're not doubling down on this area because it's not what people are responding to. And that information alone can save company millions. And I'm not exaggerating by saying that because, it's all about consumer behavior and business behavior for that matter. If you release it and it's not useful and then you're backpedaling to tweak it, I mean, historically it's been a workable model, but now I think because of how good some of these wireframing softwares are, how you can basically simulate what some of this activity would be within the software, you can get much more real feedback, much more applicable feedback very quickly too.
The amount of Americans covered by life insurance fell from 63% in 2011 to 52% in 2021. That might sound bad, but consider that most of the difference is coming from new young buyers, and they're the most critical of legacy insurance practices. In one survey, 28% of people said they simply couldn't find the time to get a life insurance plan. What with all the exams, bodily samples, and nosy questions. Meeting a representative in a stuffy office is out too. 80% of customers would prefer to handle their life insurance policy online. By carefully analyzing what customers really want and need, Dundas Life has positioned itself to be a big player. What is something that surprised you in your early days of entrepreneurship?
How much your senses get sharpened by not having a paycheck at the end of the week. It is insane. You wake up in the morning and sometimes fear alone drives you to wake up. It's like, what if this policy doesn't hit? What if we have an awful week? Like, what's going on? There's almost no need for motivation because the minute you wake up, you're looking around and you're like, wow, I have so much to do to keep this going. And at first you want to get everything done and then you realize that's not feasible. And then you get highly selective with what you do. And then you figure out what to pass off to someone else. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing some sort of continuity emerging where it's like, okay, you have a bad week, but you also had a bad week last quarter and everything turned out great. And then it's like, you calm down a little bit and then you double down on what needs to be done. And then, the process starts doing what it's supposed to be doing. But I think throughout it all, things will emerge. It'll get complicated. You just need to keep a calm head about you and just have like a schedule and process in place. Because I think that's another area. Like, I think now I know there's this huge conversation around like hustle culture and all this stuff. Like, yeah, stuff needs to get done, but like, we're not robots at the end of the day. Like, we have simple needs, nutritional needs, sleep needs, all these things. Like, might have a couple too many coffees, but I mean, it's just like, we're not built for a lot of those sorts of stresses, and you just end up burning out after it anyway. So it's got to be reasonable in the process too.
Do you have any other advice you can offer aspiring entrepreneurs?
I had this chat with an intern the other week. Don't sell yourself short. It's super important. Just being able to read regularly and having a reasonable vocabulary does go a long way. And I mean, you pair that with some service experience, even if it is fast food. I mean, it's wonderful experience because ultimately the jobs, whether you go into like customer success, you're dealing with, a similar but different clientele. It's a good stepping stone into something much greater, because if you're looking at like any customer service organization, if you're well-spoken, you have a work ethic, and you've worked at one of these organizations and you can speak to some of these sorts of experiences, it's highly sought after. And like, even in corporate, like I had a hiring manager that was just like, we love the Starbucks and the Tim Hortons people, because they kind of get it, smile and dial and, let's make magic happen. And and I think that's the big distinction between, like the people in these service jobs that are like good enough and great. It's not about selling the coffee anymore. It's about the service experience.